A YouTuber who put his life in his girlfriend's hands, a daredevil who dubbed himself China's first rooftopper, and a guy who hung from a zip line by his hair. These daredevils might have been chasing an adrenaline high, but in the end, it cost them their lives. Pedro Ruiz III thought books could stop bullets. In 2017, that assumption ended in tragedy after Ruiz, a father of two, held a book against his chest and asked his pregnant girlfriend, Mona Lisa Perez, to shoot at him. According to the Grand Forks Herald, Ruiz believed the book was thick enough to stop a .50 caliber bullet and coaxed his reluctant girlfriend into pulling the trigger.
I'm just not going to just set it and just shoot it. No. I'm going to stand behind it.
Perez later pleaded guilty to charges of second-degree manslaughter in exchange for a 6-month sentence. Wu Yongning called himself China's first rooftopper. He was a martial arts-trained stuntman, but he was most famous for performing stunts without safety equipment on top of skyscrapers. According to USA Today, in 2017, Wu was performing on top of a 62-story building in Changsha, China, when he slipped and fell to his death. Wu was an experienced stuntman who had completed similar feats hundreds of times and had made the equivalent of thousands of dollars from the videos he shot of himself performing. The stunt that ultimately took his life was reportedly worth about $15,000. Wu's family believed that Sina News, one of China's major news outlets, had put up the money. His step-uncle said that Wu needed the cash for his mother's medical expenses and for his wedding. He had planned to propose to his girlfriend the day after his death. Wu's death prompted debate in China over close-to-death reality videos, where people are encouraged to record themselves doing dangerous things in exchange for money and internet fame. Shortly after his death, Wu's stunt videos were removed from the two popular video services that had previously promoted them. McConkey was an extreme skier and stuntman who was famous for doing alpine base jumps. The year before his death, he jumped nearly 1,500 feet above Whistler Valley during a grand opening performance for a ski gondola. Then, in March of 2009, Red Bull decided to feature him in a promotional movie, but something went wrong during the shoot. McConkey was supposed to release his skis after performing a double backflip off a cliff, but only one of them disengaged, and it became tangled up with the one that was still on his foot. McConkey managed to release the ski manually, but it was too late to deploy the parachute. He died on impact. His wife, Sherry, told Outside Online, "He didn't have a death wish, he wasn't a daredevil, he wasn't stupid. Whenever he did things, he calculated them beyond what anyone could imagine." Extreme sports are always risky, but with wing walking, one mistake can be deadly. In 2011, wing walker Todd Green was performing at Selfridge Air Show in Michigan when he fell 200 feet to his death. According to CBS Detroit, Green was trying to transfer in midair from a plane to the skid of a helicopter when he slipped. Green's stunt was one of the biggest attractions of the show, and a lot of spectators initially believed the fall was part of the act. According to an Associated Press report, it wasn't until the show's announcers told the crowd something had gone wrong that they finally learned the truth. Remi Lucidi, who went by Remi Enigma, was a popular urban climber who had gained notoriety for the pictures he posted. But his attempt to climb a skyscraper in Hong Kong went dramatically wrong on July 27, 2023, leading to his death and some unnerving details about his final moments. Lucidi managed to talk his way into the building, and surveillance cameras caught footage of him on the upper floors of the 68-floor complex. However, when he exited the building and went to the top, something went wrong and he wasn't able to get back inside. Trapped, the French climber tried to attract a maid's attention by knocking on a window, but according to The Guardian, the woman thought the climber was shady and refused to acknowledge him. Unable to attract help, Lucidi fell to his death. He was 30 years old. In 1966, a New Jersey truck driver named Nick Piantanida decided for some reason that he was going to break the world record from falling from impossible heights, despite not really having the training to do so. Now, since this stunt can only happen at the literal edge of space, it seems like for most people it would remain a stupid pipe dream. But not for Piantanida. He was somehow able to find lots of enablers, including the senator who gave him a spacesuit, others who funded the stunt, and enough volunteers to help make the whole thing happen. According to Smithsonian Magazine, Piantanida made 2 attempts to ride a balloon into the sky, neither of which were successful. No one is really quite sure what happened on the 3rd attempt, but before he reached the target altitude of 123,500 feet, ground control heard a hissing sound followed by the first half of the word emergency. Piantanida was unconscious when the gondola hit the ground. He died 4 months later without ever regaining consciousness.
I had never seen my father cry until that night.
There are famous bodybuilders out there, but they don't have anything on Sailendra Nath Roy. Rather than being known for his muscles, Roy was known for his super strong hair, and he once used his ponytail to pull a train. Roy held the Guinness record for farthest distance on a zip line using hair, so he wasn't new to the hairy circuit. But the 48-year-old might not have been in the best physical shape, and when something went wrong during his final performance in April 2013, his heart was unable to withstand the stress. Spectators said he stopped moving down the zip line after about 300 feet. He struggled for close to 30 minutes shouting for help. There were no emergency personnel on hand and no one could understand what he was saying. At the end of the half hour, he became still. Ultimately, he died of a heart attack. Officials say Roy didn't have permission to do the stunt, and if he'd had a professional support team on hand, the outcome might have been different. Americans have a long and noble history of innovation, creativity, and taking wild risks to entertain, and it all started with Sam Patch, America's first daredevil. Patch survived the leap into Niagara Falls twice, but even that wasn't daring enough for him. After jumping Niagara, Patch decided to leap from the high falls on the Genesee River, which was not quite as high up as the 125-foot platform he jumped from at Niagara, but would at least bring him a new audience. And just to make the spectacle even more tempting, he promised to push a bear into the water first. Somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 cash-bearing people showed up to watch, and everything went great the first time he tried it. After his initial success, Patch scheduled a second jump, but this time something happened mid-descent. Spectators say he drooped and then hit the water looking more like a marionette than a living person. His body was found 7 miles downstream 4 months later. Interestingly, the bear survived. For magician Aimo Leikas, Russian roulette wasn't just a really stupid party trick, it was his signature trick. The Finnish magician had been doing the same Russian roulette trick on repeat for at least a year, and had somehow always managed to avoid death. Leikas' version of the trick involved 6 bullets, some of which were supposedly real and some of which were supposedly fake, and all of which were unmarked. Leikas claimed he had a psychic ability to know the difference when he was selecting the bullets out of a box. In 1976, Leikas' luck ran out and he shot himself to death in front of a crowd of spectators.
Most of us don't need to build a rocket in order to know that the Earth isn't flat. Still, there are some people who are convinced that it's all a big conspiracy that literally every scientist in the world is in on. It seemed Mike Hughes was one of that handful of people who was convinced that the Earth is flat, but he wanted the rest of the world to be convinced too. So he built a rocket, which he launched from the California desert. That's one way to find out whether or not the Earth is flat. Those remote cameras should tell you everything you need to know. Except, he didn't just send up cameras. He wanted to see the flat Earth with his own eyes. Unfortunately, his rocket crashed shortly after launch, and he was killed before he could reach the hoped-for altitude of 5,000 feet. Hughes' publicist Darren Schuster told the New York Times after Hughes' death that Hughes didn't actually believe the Earth was flat. He said he was eccentric and believed in some government conspiracies, for sure, but it was a PR stunt. Either way, it's not quite clear.
I believe it is flat.
I believe you don't believe that, and you just want a free trip to space.
A lot of people think that.
Regardless, Hughes wasn't an amateur daredevil. According to the BBC, he'd successfully completed a lower altitude launch the year before his fatal attempt, and he set a Guinness World Record in 2002 for the longest limousine jump. So his fatal accident wasn't necessarily because he was an inexperienced daredevil, and there was definitely an element of very, very bad luck. Jessi Combs originally set the land speed record for a 4-wheeled vehicle in October 2013. Her jet-powered vehicle hit 398 miles per hour, but Combs wasn't satisfied. She made a few attempts to bust her own speed record and clocked more than 483 miles per hour in those attempts. But the runs couldn't be recorded as records because of mechanical issues. Undaunted, Combs decided she was going to aim for 619 miles per hour. Ultimately, she wanted to beat Kitty O'Neill's land speed record of 512 miles per hour, which had been set in a 3-wheeled vehicle in 1976. Combs was in her jet-powered car on a dry-leg bed in Oregon's Alvord Desert when USA Today says the front wheel suffered a mechanical failure, causing the entire wheel assembly to collapse. Combs had accelerated to nearly 550 miles per hour at the time of the failure and was posthumously awarded the world record. Human beings love competitive sports. Human beings also love to watch other human beings do ridiculously dangerous stuff. The X Games, which have been held every year since 1995, are a happy union of the two. Ridiculously dangerous competitive sporting events, complete with gold medals, prize money, and mortal peril. Still, despite a large number of serious injuries, the X Games managed to get through quite a lot of years without any fatalities, until Caleb Moore's freestyle snowmobile jump at the Winter X Games in 2013. Moore was performing in the freestyle snowmobile competition when he attempted a backflip at a speed that was a little too slow for the maneuver. According to Deadspin, he under-rotated, and the snowmobile skis dug into the snow, flinging him from the seat. That might have been survivable on its own, but unfortunately, Moore's 450-pound snowmobile landed on his chest. Still, it looked like Moore would be okay. He actually walked away from the scene. A few hours later, though, it became clear that the accident had damaged his heart. He went into cardiopulmonary arrest and died a few days later, becoming the first X Games fatality. Uli Emanuele was famous for a wingsuit jump through a 6.5-foot wide crevice in a Swiss mountain, which is widely thought to be the most difficult wingsuit maneuver ever accomplished. But even the best base jumpers are vulnerable when they're flying around the mountaintops at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, and Emanuele's luck ran out while he was shooting video for GoPro in the Dolomites. According to the inertia, Emanuele lost control during a jump and crashed into the rocks before he could deploy his parachute. He was 29 years old. 60-year-old Angela Madsen was a Paralympic rower and an inspiration for anyone trying to come back from a serious injury. Madsen was injured while playing basketball in 1981, and a botched surgery cost her the use of her legs. In 1997, she became a competitive rower, and in 2012, she won a bronze medal at the Paralympic Games. Madsen's ambitions went a long way past rowing in competitions, though, and in 2007, she became the first woman with a disability to row across the Atlantic Ocean. Then in 2009, she became one of the first 2 women to row across the Indian Ocean. She then set her sights on the Pacific. This time, she planned to go solo. Tragically, Madsen died 60 days into her attempt to row across the Pacific Ocean alone. In her last communication, she'd mentioned that her boat needed repairs, but by the next day, she'd fallen silent, and tracking data indicated that the boat was not being rowed. The Coast Guard found her floating in the ocean on June 22, 2020, still tethered to her boat. So far, no one knows the circumstances that led to her death.
The human capacity for dreaming up bizarre stunts is perhaps only surpassed by the public's desire to watch people do bizarre stunts, which has proven to be a pretty lethal combo. In October 2017, Malaysian magician Lim Ba attempted a stunt which involved him sitting inside a giant wok with some rice and sweet corn. Lim had been performing this particular stunt for more than a decade and held a record of 75 minutes within the larger-than-life wok. However, the magician was also approaching 70, receiving treatment for high blood pressure, and had recently undergone a heart bypass. Needless to say, he wasn't in peak physical condition at the time of his death. Around 30 minutes into the performance, Lim started knocking on the inside of the wok. Upon removing the cover, onlookers found him unconscious, and by the time medical personnel arrived to the scene, Lim had passed away. The official cause of death was a heart attack, though police noted that the performer also suffered second-degree burns. There's something about Niagara Falls that inspires daredevils. Despite the unsettling 3-to-1 ratio of successful stunts to fatal ones, of all the daredevils who have attempted to go over the falls in some kind of vehicle, whether a barrel or a kayak, 16 people survived and 6 died. Of course, that doesn't include the dozens of people who choose to end their own lives at the Horseshoe Falls every year. Nor does it include over 5,000 bodies that have been retrieved from the bottom of the falls since 1850. Superman just can't save everyone, as much as we wish he could. On June 2, 2017, authorities found the body of Kirk Jones below the falls, but no one really seems to know much about his jump. Reports say that tourists spotted an inflatable ball going over the edge in April, and police later found Jones' personal website titled Kirk Jones Niagara Falls Daredevil, where Jones had been selling t-shirts that read, "Believe in the impossible. Kirk Jones and Misty conquer Niagara Falls." Misty was Jones' pet boa constrictor, who is believed to have been inside the inflatable ball Jones had with him. Unfortunately, the snake is thought to have perished in the fall as well. Hiker and social media star GiGi Wu actually found a way to stand out from fellow hikers by donning a bikini. Wu would wear traditional hiking clothing while making her treks up mountains, but would change into her two-piece once she reached the top. The self-proclaimed bikini climber loved hiking alone and felt anyone should be able to do it, according to the Washington Post. Of course, hiking solo does come with its own set of safety concerns, especially if a hiker isn't dressed appropriately. Wu fell 65 feet into a ravine while on a solo hike on Yushan Mountain in central Taiwan. She was lucid enough to make a phone call after falling, though she said she was unable to move because of a leg injury. Unfortunately, rescuers weren't able to reach her until at least a day later, and Wu tragically froze to death before she could be saved. No one should walk around on the wing of an airplane unless it's firmly parked on the asphalt without an insane amount of proper training. Plenty of folks have gotten themselves hurt, or worse, killed after playing around with an airplane.
Performing low-level aerobatics can be a dangerous business.
A rapper by the name of Jon James thought a wing walking stunt would make for an awesome music video. However, while he reportedly trained some for the daring act, he was far from a professional stuntman, and he didn't have the practice required to safely perform the death-defying act. James reportedly walked a little too far out on the wing, which caused the pilot to lose control of the aircraft. The rapper tried to hold on as the Cessna went into a spin, but by the time he let go, James was too close to the ground to use his parachute. The pilot regained control of the plane and landed safely, but James tragically lost his life in the accident. Everyone knows professional wrestling is staged, but that doesn't mean it lacks real-life danger. In May 1999, 33-year-old pro wrestler Owen Hart fell 85 feet from the rafters of Kemper Arena in Kansas City while performing a stunt. Hart was supposed to swoop into the arena prior to his match, but his safety harness wasn't correctly attached. Because fans know the theatrics involved in professional wrestling, many people in the crowd believe they were witnessing a part of the show. Spectator Leo Washington told the New York Daily News, "When they took Hart off in a stretcher, everybody cheered for him like he was a football player being taken off the field. It wasn't until an hour later that commentators confirmed Hart had died in the fall."
Butch Laswell performed more than 6,000 successful motorcycle jumps during his career, but before his last one in 1996, he remarked to a friend that his speedometer wasn't working. He was also concerned about the wind. Even compared to other stunts, this one was terrifying. Laswell planned to jump over a 38-foot-tall pedestrian walkway and land on a ramp that he couldn't even see. Despite his concerns, Laswell went ahead with the stunt. Investigators say he was going at least 85 miles an hour when he jumped, 10 miles an hour faster than his intended speed. And sure enough, spectators later recalled that it appeared as if the wind had pushed him off course. Laswell fell 65 feet onto the pavement and later died from his injuries. In June 2021, 28-year-old Alex Harvill died during a practice jump just before he was due to make a public attempt on the record at an air show in Washington. Harvill died from blunt force trauma to the torso after he came down just a little short of the landing mound. In the wake of the tragedy, the air show's organizers announced that they planned to share their proceeds with Harvill's widow and 2 children. So that, at least, is a very small silver lining. In 1986, Robinson was a professional stuntman at the peak of his career when he suddenly died doing a routine motorcycle stunt for a movie called $1 Million Mystery. Robinson was no wannabe either. He held the records for the highest fall onto an airbag, the longest ramp-to-surface jump in a car, and the highest fall while on fire. Weirdly, the stunt that killed him was a simple maneuver, one in which he was supposed to take a turn at 50 miles an hour at the edge of an embankment. And sure, that may sound tough to most of us, but to Robinson, this was just another day at the office. Sadly, he ended up losing control of his bike and fell down the embankment. But it wasn't the fall that killed him, it was the landing. On the way down, Robinson hit a rock ledge and was impaled by a branch. He died on his way to the hospital. German-born daredevil Henry Roland called himself the human fly because of a fly's uncanny ability to stick to vertical surfaces. He was a seasoned stunt performer with more than 21 years of experience in climbing stunts and a history of surviving some pretty ghoulish accidents. Unfortunately, Roland's luck ran out on October 8, 1937. For his last stunt, he climbed to the top of a 20-foot pole that was attached to a 90-foot ladder and proceeded to perform a number of balancing and swaying tricks. To complete the stunt, he was supposed to grab onto a swinging trapeze, but the wind blew the trapeze out of his reach and he fell to his death instead. Ormer Locklear was a daredevil from childhood. As a kid, he once attached a motorcycle to a pulley and rode it to the top of a 4-story building. Then at the age of 20, he built a glider and tried to fly it from the roof of the local high school. It crashed, so he built another one and tried it again. From there, he embarked on a lively career of almost killing himself time and time again, until 1920 when he took on work as a stuntman for a movie called The Skyway Man. For this stunt, Locklear was supposed to put his Jenny biplane into a spin while another man lit flames to simulate an engine fire. The stunt began at an altitude of 10,000 feet and was supposed to end at 2,000 feet, at which time Locklear would regain control of the plane and land safely. That's not what happened, though. Instead, the plane continued to spin until it reached an altitude of 200 feet, and when Locklear finally tried pulling out, it was too late. The plane crashed and both men died. Although it's not certain what really happened, the prevailing theory is that the movie lights that were pointed at the plane blinded Locklear, so he didn't know how close to the ground he was.
A minor thing goes wrong, you can get hurt really bad. That's always in the back of your mind when you go up that high.
Samuel Gilbert Scott made his living as a high diver. He was a former sailor who probably often worked at the top of ships' masts. After leaving the US Navy, he transitioned those skills into daredevil performances in which he would climb to the top of a ship's mast, do some acrobatics, and then dive into the water. Since daredevils need to pull off increasingly daring stunts lest their audiences get bored, he soon expanded his repertoire to include jumps from bridges, piers, and chimneys. Once diving started to become old hat, he decided it would be fun to wow the crowd by pretending to hang himself. Only on January 11, 1841, he wasn't just pretending. In front of a large crowd, he hanged himself from Waterloo Bridge and died before the crowd realized it wasn't part of the act. Though it seems like it could have been deliberate, most people agree that Scott's death was a tragic accident. Lincoln Beachey was an early aviation pioneer, which wasn't exactly a job for the faint of heart. He got a start in dirigibles, but soon moved on to airplanes, and immediately impressed the aviation world by figuring out how to recover from a death spiral. Incidentally, it was Beachey who was responsible for the skyrocketing number of airplane-related deaths in the early part of the 20th century, as stunt pilots everywhere tried to mimic his tricks. While many failed, however, Beachey himself seemed invulnerable. And in 1915, not long after he became the first American to successfully fly a loop in an airplane, Beachey was killed while attempting an inverse loop at 3,000 feet. The plane stalled, and Beachey tried to regain control with a maneuver that ended up ripping the wings right off of it. Beachey crashed into the San Francisco Bay, but he didn't die right away. According to the coroner, his only injury was a broken leg, and what killed him was the safety harness. Unable to escape, Beachey ended up drowning while still strapped inside his plane. Here's a fun fact for you. Looney Tunes characters aren't the only ones who jump off impossibly high diving ledges into incredibly shallow targets.
What's up, Doc?
In fact, the official name for this kind of thing is shallow diving, and believe it or not, it's still a thing people do today. The stunt performer basically does a huge belly flop into shallow water from way up high. The shallowness of the water and the awkward presentation as you hit saves your neck from breaking, though it's evidently as painful as it looks. Roy Fransen was famous for his shallow dives, but he was more famous for the fact that he would light himself on fire just before doing them. He cleverly named his act the Dive of Death, and he kept on doing it for years. And while you might think his career would be short-lived, he pulled it off again and again right up until 1985 when he was 69 years old. Fittingly though, and perhaps inevitably, he eventually died performing the Dive of Death. It takes a pretty well-trained horse not to freak out when a rider starts pulling tricks on its back at high speeds. This was an art form that evolved in America during the Wild West era, though Russian Cossacks had been doing these kinds of mounted tricks during battles for centuries. And if it looks dangerous, that's because it is. If you don't have a very well-trained horse, you're going to wind up getting hurt. And even if your horse does know what it's doing, you're not guaranteed to come out unscathed. Otto Kline found this out the hard way on April 21, 1915. Kline was doing a trick that involved launching himself from one side of a horse over the saddle and onto the other side, all while the horse was moving along at a nice, terrifying pace. But his hand slipped off the pommel and he was flung into an audience box, striking it with his head. He died a couple of hours later at the hospital without ever regaining consciousness. Incidentally, his horse, who was very well trained indeed, stopped in her tracks as soon as she realized she'd lost her rider. Talk about professionalism. Fatal skydiving accidents do happen, and they can even happen to professionals like Stephen Hilder. Then again, accident might be the wrong word to use here because everyone is pretty sure that Hilder's death wasn't an accident. In 2005, Hilder was performing with a team of fellow skydivers at a competition at London Heathrow Airport. The team jumped from 13,000 feet, performed a series of aerial displays, and then prepared to open their chutes at 4,000 feet, but Hilder's chute didn't open. And neither did his spare, which is an accident that almost never happens in skydiving. Investigators later discovered that both chutes had cords that had been cut by a pair of scissors discovered in Hilder's car. The scissors had just one person's DNA on them, Hilder's. The coroner later refused to accept Hilder's death had been a suicide, however, and even to this day it remains unclear whether his death was self-inflicted or if someone made it look that way.
According to the Daily Mail, a man named Kyle Lee Stocking attempted to duplicate a feat he saw on YouTube in March 2013. If it had gone as planned, the 22-year-old would have swung beneath the 110-foot Corona Arch in Utah after jumping off the top. But he misjudged the length of the rope he was using, and instead of swinging, he struck the ground. While YouTube claims to prohibit content that encourages dangerous behavior, the video that inspired the fatal stunt is alive and well with no warning on it. Russian base jumper Valery Rozov was trying to conquer the 7 summits, hoping to jump from the highest peak in each of the 7 continents while wearing a wingsuit. According to IBT, Rozov had already jumped from the Olvatana in the Antarctic and in 2009 had even leaped into an active volcano.
even in the air, I feel that I did it.
Rozov held the world record for highest base jump in a wingsuit. That was for jumping from a 23,688-foot peak in Tibet, which is north of Mount Everest. So the 22,000-foot peak he was jumping from at the time of his death was actually a little bit lower than his record, but that doesn't make it any safer. The 52-year-old Daredevil died when he crashed into a cliff after leaping off a peak in eastern Nepal. In another tragic base jumping accident, well-known climber Dean Potter and his friend Graham Hunt died in Yosemite National Park when they jumped from Taft Point wearing wingsuits and crashed into a rocky ridgeline. This accident highlights the sad fact that experience doesn't necessarily protect you. Potter had made the exact same jump at least 20 times, and Hunt was probably similarly experienced.
That's something that I need to practice because otherwise it just doesn't happen.
Other climbers expressed regret at Potter's death, but the words of fellow climber Doug Robinson may have summed it up best. According to BBC News, he said, "We're very sad, but not very surprised. He was pushing the envelope all his life." Free diving is the diving version of free climbing. It's more or less done without equipment, and it's about 1,000,000 times more dangerous than the version that's done with equipment. In 2002, free diving champion Audrey Mestre was trying to break the world record dive of 531.5 feet. Everything went well until she was on her way back up. According to the Miami Herald, her cause of death was equipment failure. In No Limits freediving, an air tank fills a balloon, which helps the diver get quickly back to the surface. In the end, Mestre's air tank didn't have enough air in it to inflate the balloon.